obviously we've heard a lot in the last couple of years about headcount reduction, broader cost management, etc. And of course that's true, but at the same time the untold story to a large extent, particularly in the media, has been around the fact that organisations are still struggling to hire critical talent. I think the Deloitte guys gave a great definition of what we mean by critical talent a bit earlier on. Let me just add to that a little bit and say that in the Middle East, 25% of organisations in the last 12 months has said that they've increased headcount by 5% or more. So actually, as the employment market becomes even more competitive, as organisations across the board look to increase further, then the challenge that we're all going to have in trying to hire critical talent is increasing even more. So I tend to agree with my friends from Deloitte that as PwC announced that we're going to hire 1,000 consultants in the UK, that's a challenge. I'm glad I'm in the Middle East. I say initially, then I realise how difficult it is to hire really talented people here in many cases. So first statistic and first message is very much to realise that, of course, we've heard loads, particularly in the media, about headcount reduction, but actually many organisations are still recruiting, and that often used cliché of war for talent is going to become an even hotter topic this year and next year as organisations step up their recruitment plans. Recruitment planning is one part of it. The other part is making sure we've got the long-term strategy. And what I mean by that is I refer back to my first point, which is we need to understand what our graduates want, what our millennial populations want. Second question that we ask CEOs is, how concerned are you about the following potential threats to your business growth prospects? Clearly loads of concern about a whole range of risk issues, about a whole range of financial issues. But CEOs, as I said right at the start, are still really concerned about the availability of key skills. I think 64% of CEOs in the Middle East who we surveyed said that they're really concerned about the availability of key skills. So if it's on our CEO's agenda, if it isn't on our agenda, it will be soon. So let's be proactive rather than reactive. We also asked CEOs where they're looking to invest further or invest less in certain areas within their organisations. And what was surprising to me, but pleasing, is how much of a recognition there is that there needs to be continued investment in leadership and talent development. So 68% of CEOs said they're either going to increase investment in leadership and talent development, or they're going to increase it significantly. So there's a real sort of trend to say, there's a real recognition that we need to spend money on this. So I don't know what's happening in this room and whether you're seeing that further investment. Hopefully you are. If you're not, then your competition are investing further, which means you're going to need to. If we look specifically at sort of people strategy and where CEOs are expecting further investment across the range of HR areas, then again the message is fairly consistent, that there is a recognition that there needs to be further investment and also change within areas like training and development, whilst at the same time there's a recognition that costs probably need to be managed in many cases. So we're actually seeing no change or some level of change within areas such as pension and healthcare. So I guess the message there is, whilst things like direct rewards, salaries, pensions, healthcare, there will be changes, the major emphasis is very much on changing the way that people are trained and developed and making sure there's effective staff morale, etc. So a pretty consistent message, I think, coming out from the CEOs. And as I say, I want to just share with you a bit of that data. There's much more that we'd be more than happy to share with you. Right. Sort of bringing this together a little bit, when we talk about talent, I just wanted to sort of make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what we mean by talent. Many different definitions, but four key areas I always think we should focus on when we're talking about talent, which is how do you deploy people so they're getting the right experience for the long term, and how do you deploy people so they're filling the business need in the short and medium term. Second area when you're talking about talent is how do you manage risk. Risk manifests itself in many different ways. Succession planning is one of them, and making sure you've got effective coverage for your critical positions is really key. And I want to just give you one example there of an oil major that I spent a significant proportion of time with working. They had very robust succession plans. And they had spent loads and loads and invested lots of money in making sure they understood what the critical roles were, and they understood who could fill those critical roles tomorrow if something were to happen. They understood who could potentially fill that role in 2 years' time, and they could understand who could fill that role in 5 years' time. Now we did, and that was useful for them. We then went back a couple of years later and looked at it to see whether it was working. On the face of it, it was all working really effectively because there were loads of names in boxes. The piece that was missing was we looked at the data on what proportion of those critical roles were filled through those succession plans versus filled from the external market. So, any ideas? Any ideas on what percentage were filled internally? Give me a number, tell me you're awake. Sorry? 30. Yeah, 20%. 20% of those roles were filled from the succession plans. 80% they were relying on the external market. Again, to agree with one of the earlier presentations, that's not a sustainable model. And also it costs a huge amount of money because you're investing loads of money on doing those succession plans and they're not properly being leveraged. And thirdly, it doesn't exactly help the credibility of HR, does it? You know, when we're placing major emphasis on something like that, and then the reality is it's not being used by the business. So for many reasons, you know, we need to make sure that succession plans aren't just something that sit on paper. Sort of third piece of when we're talking about talent management is to make sure we've got clear definitions, which is sort of obvious. But in my view, there isn't a consistent definition of what an organisation means by talent. You know, it can be, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, it can be the top 5%, it can be the top 10%. My personal view, it shouldn't probably be more than the top 15% because I think the group starts to become unmanageable. However, I would say that you shouldn't just focus on that top 10 and then ignore the other 85%, because there's massive risks, particularly around those people who just miss out on being defined as top talent, who are still really important to your organisation, and you clearly don't want to lose. So you need to make sure that your talent management programme is part of your overall employee engagement programme. The fourth area, whenever I'm talking about talent management, is around what's the infrastructure to make sure that there's your individuals. Once you've done the identification,